Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Leverage Your Podcast show. And I am pumped today because I love talking to Jason. We just we just like talk a mile a minute. We totally have the same views. And I love your new program that you're launching, or your program that you have to help podcasters launch a series. And we're kind of going to dive into the strategy behind that, because I
hmm
just think it's going to help so many people get started in podcasting when all they do is procrastinate, right?
Got to press that start button. That's one of the
Yes.
biggest things. If you don't, and I think that transcends podcasting. If you're not willing to take that first step, the journey will never begin. Look at me being profound in our first minute.
I know. Woohoo. Podcast. We're done now. It's good.
Drop the mic. That was
Yes.
easy. Easiest guest appearance ever.
I know. And the shortest episode ever. Um,
Mm,
yeah, so
also true.
welcome. Yeah, exactly. Welcome, Jason, with Bomb Track Media. And so let's lay the foundation here and talk about, why are people delaying a podcast to launch? And I've seen it. I've had clients that they're going to launch a podcast, and then another month goes by and another month goes by, and then it's a year. Like, oh my God.
hmm Yeah. I mean, there are a number of reasons that people can stop themselves. There was those initial questions of, I hate my voice. Is anybody else going to be annoyed by my voice too? Which is something you have to get out of your own head
Yes.
because your voice sounds different in your head than what you're actually projecting. That's a long story, but something like that can make a person say, I'll never do a podcast.
Yeah.
They also think that there's too much content out there about their subject matter, about their area of expertise. Well, why would anybody want to listen to me when they could listen to Joe and Jane and everybody else? They don't have your perspectives. That's why they'll listen. There's also the thought of, what if I get started but don't really find any footing? And I can't grasp this. I can't get a handle on how to be a good podcaster. These are all questions that I've asked in the past
Oh, same.
when I had never done this. It's, like when I was 7 years old and picked up a golf club for the first time, I probably said, will I ever be able to hit a drive 300 yards down the fairway? Because at that point it seemed absolutely impossible because I'd never swung a club. Now I can do that sometimes, not as often as I would like to, but I try to do it as much as possible. You have to get moving and move forward and understand that perfection is unattainable. You have to think about what you want to accomplish, the message that you want to bring to the world, and think of the importance of everything in your brand and everything that you're bringing to the world. What's the best way to project that message in a way that people can communicate with you, can learn from you, can see you as a resource, see you as an asset? The answer is podcasting.
Hmm.
I firmly believe that we are at this point in our world. If you can recall back 20 some years ago when no one had websites, and all of a sudden websites became the thing to have, and the biggest resistors waited until everyone else had one, and then they finally got online and had a website. Fast forward a few more years and social media started becoming a thing that businesses were using. And all the resistors said, well, I have a website. What do I need social media for? And they
Hmm.
stayed away as long as they could. I firmly believe podcasting is the next thing in that evolution. People are going to start looking at brands and saying, where's your podcast?
Yeah.
Just like they said, where's your Facebook page? Where's your website? Because so many people are using this medium, not just for the audio component, but for everything else that you can get from it. And I know that's a big part of your world, Lindsay. And that's why I was ecstatic to connect with you, because we are absolutely simpatico when it
Hmm.
comes to what you do with this content and how you utilize it. That's the thing you have to think about. If you can get beyond those initial fears and start thinking about having powerful conversations and making very, very good connections in your space and in your industry, that's going to put you in a place where hitting start will be the easiest thing you do. And then you'll look back and say, why didn't I do this a year ago?
I know. It's like we're our own worst enemies, getting stuck in our heads. And then, like, if it's
Mm-hmm.
not the whole mindset of like, oh my God, I got to put myself out there. I know that was for me. But then there's like the tech. And what I'm hearing as well is like, oh my God, but I have to do this weekly. It's so much work. Like, what if I can't?
Mm-hmm.
I have to come. It's like a commitment phobe. I have to commit to doing something weekly.
Yeah.
But the beauty is that you don't
You
have
don't.
to.
No, that's probably one of the biggest
Yes.
misconceptions that this space will have. And I can tell a perfect story as to why. I'm not going to name names, but I was at a podcast conference where I heard somebody ask a very prominent podcaster what she could do to get more from her podcast. She wanted to take it to the next level. She wanted to do more with it. And the immediate question with no context was, how many episodes you're releasing now a week? And she said two. Now you think about that. That's
That's a
I've done that
lot.
before. That is a lot of work. Without even batting an eye, his response was, "Oh, you need to do three." Now, okay, fine. However, what if she's already on the verge of burnout doing two and
Hmm.
wondering if there's a better way to do things? Wouldn't the best question be, how do you feel about doing two? What's happening with two? Maybe it's not about doing more, it's about adding more quality to those two. Maybe it's backing down to one, but
Hmm.
putting more quality into that one. There's so many things in so many directions that could go to blanket it with, oh, you got to do three. We have to get out of this mindset of quantity over quality. For a business owner, you have so many responsibilities on your plate. And that's not even just on the marketing side. I'm talking everything, sales and managing your people and client acquisition, you name it, across the brand. I mean, you know what you have to
Oh
do on a
God, yeah.
daily basis. Trying to add in the rigors of a weekly podcast is lunacy unless you truly do have the time. And that's the first thing I address with anybody coming into this space. What is your time situation? How much time can you dedicate to doing this?
Hmm.
That's truly going to dictate the better or best way for you to proceed. Because if you get locked into trying to do this weekly, you may be gung ho at the beginning and you come out of the gate strong and you're super passionate about the consistency and keeping this going, but eventually things start to catch up. If you start looking at the metrics the wrong way,
Hmm.
you start letting other things come into play. If other things on your plate start to catch up, believe me, it's going to happen if you don't evaluate it on the front end and identify what's the best way to do this from a time perspective, and then create a strategy that allows you to do so. That's why for anybody starting new, even if you're not a brand, a business, if you're just doing it as a hobby, start with a season. Do season-based format because you can get really tightly focused on the subject matter you want to talk about. You can do a handful of episodes. There's no exact
Hmm.
length to how long your season could be or should be, but you can identify the exact topics you want to talk about. You build 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 episodes. You get them all edited, and then you can put them all out at once if you want to, much like Netflix does with their
Yeah.
series. Put out this content for your audience to binge. Plus, you have all of this content that you can repurpose for your social media posts, for your videos, for your webinars, for your emails, for your blogs. It's not so much about putting out content every week. It's about putting out a clear message and being very, very considerate of your audience's time as well and letting them know season one is there for you to listen to. You're constantly referring back to that,
Yeah.
keeping your time front of mind, and you're not making your podcast an anchor. You're making it more of something that's fun and enjoyable. And at the end of the day, a very critical piece of all of your marketing and branding strategies. You've got to think about time first.
Wholeheartedly. And I feel like if you say to a podcaster or a new person, just do a season, all you have to do is like 10, 15 episodes or whatever it may be, like that feels doable. It's like, okay, I'm gonna, crunch it for
Yeah.
how much, however long a time, get it done. But also think about how exciting that would be, like you said, in the Netflix way, to launch a whole season
Yeah.
all at once, like the buzz you can create, especially if you have guests, all that traffic that you can get.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be super exciting and you feel so accomplished. Oh my God.
Yeah. And you don't have to feel because someone on TikTok or someone on a stage said the only way to succeed with podcasting is to put out X amount of episodes per week. That's not what it's all about. We've got to get beyond this, because if you think about that advice and then put it next to the numbers of people that start and stop a podcast, it's disgusting. Because I have to believe that that's the advice people are hearing, and then they start a podcast and they get 2, 3, 4 episodes deep. They don't see massive gains. They realize there is a lot of work involved. They aren't properly planned out, or they aren't properly properly prepared. I'm stumbling over my words today. Properly prepared with their strategy to do this the right way. So they come into it blind, and then they just start going, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is a lot
Uh-huh.
more than I was expecting. And we're really not getting a lot of gain on it. I'm out. That's terrible.
It is
And you
brutal.
cost yourself so many opportunities because you didn't give yourself a chance to arrive and ultimately gain your audience trust. Your audience only has X amount of time in their day, in their week, and they're going to use some of that time to listen to podcasts. But if you're not delivering value, or if you're not showing up when you say you're going to show up, they're going to find somebody
I
else that
know.
will. So you have to think about how you're communicating with your audience and then bringing them the content when you say you will. But that doesn't mean that you have to do it every week.
Yeah.
Think of and how social media plays into this. We're in this pay to play world. So you have to either put a paid strategy together to get visibility or just repeat some of the content that you've been sharing. Don't kill yourself with new stuff because only a small percentage sees that content anyway. If somebody sees it on repeat, big deal. If somebody
Totally.
new sees it again, great. But if you overcomplicate the whole process and just kill yourself trying to create massive amounts of assets and really not being focused on what the whole show is supposed to be about, then you're
Yeah.
going to lose the message real quick.
Totally. And so let's talk about goals here for a minute because I'm hearing what you're saying. And it's like your podcast is not necessarily about growing an audience, it can be about those relationships. I had one of my clients created a season podcast, and the only reason why she did it so that she can invite the guest and have her foot in the door because her clients were her avatar. So like
Mm,
they already had an audience built in. So it was like to create partnerships.
okay.
She ended up keep going and she loved it so much. So that was cool. But and like you said, you could use it just to create content. So how
Yeah.
do you figure out your clients' goals when you're going through this launch strategy with them?
It starts with determining the why, and that could be that's never going to be the same for one brand, one podcaster to the
Totally.
next. Everybody's going to have a different reason why they're doing this. Ultimately, the goal is to bring something special to the world, but in doing that, you're going to have your own reasons for doing so. There is that possibility of wanting to get to the levels of Joe Rogan. If anybody says that, he's like, okay, be prepared for a couple decades worth of work because that's how long it took him. Don't think it's just going to
I
happen.
know.
But you have to also get really good at what you're doing if you want to get to those levels. But there's so many things that we don't talk about enough through podcasting that can be incredibly valuable, even if it's not monetary. Now, of course, we want to monetize our podcast. There are ways to do that right from the beginning. Maybe it's not a lot of money, but it's something to offset some costs. Perhaps you can find partnerships that will be willing to grow with you and therefore be lucrative while you're growing. That's great. But what about the networking feature that's built into podcasting? Like you were just mentioning with your
Yeah.
client, if someone comes at this with value in mind and understands that there is a relationship to be built, they can gain so much from that because you never know where that relationship might go.
Hmm.
But if you come into this very transactionally, if I would have just showed up today, Lindsay, and said, "Hey, what's up? Let's go," and I just started selling my VIP day and selling all my stuff, and then we get done and I say, "Thanks for having me," and I just leave, would you ever air that episode? Probably not,
Yeah.
because I mean, and I'm not speaking for you, but
Yeah.
overall, audiences don't necessarily want to hear sales pitches when they tune into a podcast. They want value, they want storytelling, they want to know that they're finding resources they can turn to and they can trust. But if you come at this transactionally, you're never going to establish that. So you have to start thinking about podcasting on a whole new level.
Hmm.
The big thing that I know we'll dive into more is the content perspective. I look at podcasting as not only a great way to hit people in the audio medium where they are obviously spending a lot of time because this part's passive. They can listen to a podcast in the car, at the
Hmm.
gym, on a walk, doing anything that doesn't involve their hands. They just have their earphones in their ear and they're spending intimate time with you, building that relationship and building that trust. But on top of that, it's 2024. The majority of podcasts have this video component in the recording as well. You also have the ability to pull the transcriptions and use those words for a number of different
Hmm.
things, from your website content, blogs, emails, social media, lead magnets, write a book. There's so much packed into
Yeah.
this one episode that we are putting together right now that If you don't take advantage of that, all you're doing is working harder, not smarter,
Agreed.
because you're more than likely trying to create content for all of these other outlets. But if you use your podcast the right way, you can draw that content from one single recording and utilize it in a number of different ways. When you do that, you're putting yourself in a much more efficient manner of production across the board. And therefore, your podcast becomes a more valuable asset to your business as well. So you get the
Agreed.
benefit of building the audio component, but you get all these other built-in features as well.
And like when you do a season, can you imagine being months ahead of your content marketing strategy? Like
Yeah,
that would
for
be like,
sure.
ooh, the weight off of your shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy.
And yeah, and the season format, you could do as many as you want per year. I think the sweet
Yeah.
spot's three to four,
Yeah.
and you could do them as many as 5 episodes. Again, there's the beautiful thing about podcasting is another thing we don't talk about right now. It's very wild, wild west.
Yeah.
We have no regulation. There are no set rules. There isn't anybody that's officially said, well, the only way you could do this is to
I
do it
know.
weekly. Do it however you
Do
want
what you
that
want.
fits your time, fits your schedule, fits your needs,
Yeah.
and you're going to be happier with the process because again, you're doing it for your reasons, not somebody else's.
Totally. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. It's funny how like some people come to me and it's like, "Oh, I don't know whether to do an interview style podcast or a solo." I'm like, "Why do you have to pick one?" Like
Mm-hmm.
just
Yeah, do both.
some can be that, some can be, panel, it can be whatever. There's no
Mm-hmm.
rules. You can pivot at any time. It's your podcast, man. You do what you want.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's dive
Amen.
into the launch pieces because I find that's really overwhelming for a lot of entrepreneurs. Or like, oh my God, it's going to take me forever to launch a podcast. So, what decisions do you step your clients through? Like, what decisions do we have to make when it comes to creating a launch or launching a show?
Well, the first thing we talk about is the fact that your launch is a big deal because you've put a lot of time into this. It doesn't matter how many episodes are comprised in that season. It doesn't matter the length of those. There's work involved here. You should be proud of that work and you should be celebrating that with your existing audience. So I recommend starting to pump up the crowd weeks before you actually put the season out there. And if you are pre-recording, you've got the content to do it. I think one of the shortcomings that we experience as podcasters, and believe me, I've been victim of this as well, is we have all this great content and we record weeks, even months in advance. So we have all this stuff in the queue, but we don't do anything with it until the week the audio
That's so
component goes live.
true.
We're pulling out clips to promote this week's episode, but in reality, what we should be doing is using all of those clips for weeks leading up to it. So you're giving yourself all of this content to work with to where, and this could be all of the content you have or all the content you share because you've got such a wealth and such a full bank of it. But we typically don't do that.
No, you're right.
And we miss opportunities there because there's so much left in the folder that never gets shared in the video side of it, in the written side of it. We just have the full
Yeah.
audio component out there. So you have to start thinking on that level when it comes to a launch. This is all it's all a huge deal for your audience and they need to get primed up for it. I think of it like television. When a network or even like a Netflix today is building up to the release of a season, there is all
Oh my
sorts of
God.
the
Absolutely.
perfect example right
Trailers.
now. Well, trailers, commercials. So you want to talk about social media coming into play?
Mhm.
I'm a big fan of Cobra Kai because as a kid, I loved the Karate Kid movies. So I fell into the Cobra Kai vortex as well. They're launching season 6, the first part of it in July, and they're sharing all sorts of clips on Instagram right now. We're still a month away. They've been
Yeah.
doing that for a few weeks now. That's that's how you do it. That's how you get your crowd anticipating this release. You do the same with your podcast. And you have to think about not only is it going to be the podcast release part of it, it's going to be all this other content that you're creating around it, but what it becomes is really it becomes the number one key piece of all of your marketing, all of your branding, and it should be.
Mhm.
And if you're using it for your brand, you're using it to drive home the point that you are a resource that people should trust, then it's doing its job.
Yeah.
And it's saving you so much time because all this content got created in one fell swoop. That's why I feel this needs to be such a major piece of what people are doing going forward. But from a launch perspective, to answer your question,
Yeah.
don't just roll out one episode. When it comes to launch day, we're not just putting one episode out
You.
there. We're putting out, like I said, I believe in dropping the whole season at once.
Agreed.
I like giving my audience the ability to binge everything, not have to wait as like this is something I want to start playing with as my seasons progress, doing cliffhangers. Like the end of
Ooh.
season 2 could be this cliffhanger that keeps people coming back for season 3, like doing it like television
Yeah.
does,
Yeah.
giving somebody a reason to say, oh man, I got to come back and see what happens next.
Hmm.
So
That's cool.
thinking of your launch on the level of being epic, giving your audience something to truly sink their teeth into. That's going to make this much more exciting for you and for your listeners because it gives them so much content to consume. They're more likely to share it with others. They're more likely to leave you a positive review.
Yeah.
They're more likely to reach out and give you direct feedback about what they think. There's so much value in putting a massive just massive attention on your launch. If you overlook that part, it can come out flat.
Yeah. So
And
true.
then and it's not saying you can't recover from that, but don't waste the
Yeah.
opportunity. Go nuts with it.
That's true.
It's a big deal. Treat it as such, and you're gonna enjoy
Yeah.
yourself a lot more and get a lot more from it at the end of the day.
Yeah. And not rush the process and give yourself that
Right.
time to kind of create that buzz. So when
Right.
you're going through a VIP day, getting someone organized for their launch in record time, like what decisions do you run through? I know obviously you have to like figure out what your title is, what your podcast art is going to be, but I
Mhm.
feel like podcast entrepreneurs, they get like, oh my God, I have so many decisions to make. Like you just run through it, right? Like what do you guys have to decide?
The way that we start off is I give you what I call a podcast blueprint. And the blueprint is very detailed and it covers the foundational questions that every aspiring podcaster should be asking themselves. And a lot of it is, about time
Yeah.
and episode formats. And I mean, not to go into great detail, but it's all of the things that are important on the front end. Then we do a market analysis. Look at other podcasts in your space. What are they doing? What do you like about those podcasts? What don't you like about those podcasts? What could you do better than those podcasts? And then identifying your avatar, your target listener, the one listener that you want to create content for. If you're creating content for everybody, you're creating content for nobody.
Totally.
So you have to get very granular with who you're speaking to. And this exercise that I have in place allows you to identify all of the major questions that you may think about for that person. And it's sometimes even a little silly. Like you may look at it and be like, why does this matter? But the more detailed you get, the more you're going to know the
Yeah.
person you're speaking to. And that helps when it comes to creating content because you can always say, what does Lindsay want? What does Lindsay want to hear? What does Jason like? What is Jason going to think of this? This is what you need to, this is the level you need to be at to truly create that engaging content that you want to captivate your audience and then ultimately grow your audience over time. So before we ever sit down for the VIP day, that exercise is completed. And then I'm looking at everything and I can shape the biggest parts that we need to address throughout that VIP day. So there's not a wasted minute. We're going to take the time to do this the right way, but I want to make sure that whoever is joining me is getting the most bang for their buck. They walk away from this strategy day with the only thing they need to do is press record and do their podcast. They will literally have the framework, the blueprint, all the tools, everything they need to do it the right way. Once you have all that in place, as long as you don't drag your feet with the recording process, because you're going to have all your episodes formatted out too. You literally will just have to record.
I was just going to ask that. Like, do we need to think about like what are the titles? What are the topics? What are the talking points that you want to lay out? Or what are the concepts? What are your call to actions? Like,
yep. In the blueprint, I ask everybody to jot down their ideas. What would they want their first season to look like? Or if it's an existing podcast, what do they want their next season to look like? How are we going to transition you from a show that pod faded to a new seasonal format? Put some ideas on paper. And then when we get into our session where we're grinding things out, we are going to have everything outlined where you can take that and then build your episode content from there. The branding side of things, I'm not going to sit with anybody and design things on Canva while they watch. That's a waste of time. But we're going to have an idea based on their brand. If they have an existing, like if it's a business, for example, and they have existing brand aesthetics, we want the podcast to match up with that. because it's not going to do any service if a person can't identify that this podcast is a part of this brand.
No.
And a lot of that comes down to the visual. So finding brand colors and palettes and making sure that's all aligned, that's a big part of it as well. But we don't necessarily have to sit there and do that.
Yeah.
That's something that can be done off mic while they're recording. I could say, here's a couple of mock-ups of what you may want to use, or maybe you have an idea, blah, 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 blah. But all of these major items that might lead to somebody when they're getting close to putting this together saying, oh man, I didn't do this. Oh crap, I forgot to do that. Oh shit, I didn't do that. Like all these things like this, and this can happen. You're not gonna have that after you finish with me, because we're gonna check all those boxes, because I've been through this many times.
Yeah.
On my own and with other clients. We are going to make sure the boxes are checked. So when you go live, you can do it with confidence, you can do it with clarity, and you can do it in a fun and enjoyable way. You're not stressing out about your podcast launch. You can sit back and just say, we did everything right. And now it's time for our audience to enjoy what we created.
Love it. What about the processes part of it? Because I find that people launch a podcast, they're super excited, but they never have the process dialed in. So then it just, increases their chance of podfade. Do you how do you map that out? Like, how do you create a production plan, I guess, for lack of better terms?
Well, the good thing about this exercise from start to finish, I mean, if anybody ever wanted to come back and do another VIP day for their next season, I would do that with them in a heartbeat. This isn't just a one-time thing. Yeah. I would honestly, and not even just trying to put more business in my pocket, I'm saying that having someone that's done this for 10 years help you develop each season, that's a pretty good investment. And it's going to set you up
make
for
your
more
life
success.
So much easier. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Now, if you don't want to bring me back on, you want to do it yourself, you've now been given the blueprint where you just have to repeat the process. And as long as you come into this with the right strategy, and that's part of the VIP day as well, is looking at the long term. I mean, we don't want to get too far ahead, but we also don't want to make it to where you do your first season and then no one hears anything from you for 2 years. What's the next step? Once that season's out there, yeah, you've got a lot of content to work with, but how are you going to follow this up? And that's not the easiest question to answer, because a lot of what you do next is going to come down to audience reaction.
That's
and and I will say that to put a caveat on that, it has nothing to do with download numbers, because that is the biggest load of crap in our industry.
Yippers.
The reason I say people get too fixated on that number way too soon. And I had a great conversation with a gentleman on Threads the other day where we were talking about this. It was based on a post of what he said to a client, because he said after 10 episodes, the client asked him how their downloads were. And he said, I didn't even look at that yet. And they said, why? He said, because I'm more focused on your consumption rates. We need to make sure that your content's engaging enough and there aren't people dropping off way too soon, because that's going to dictate whether we need to make some tweaks in how we produce your show. That is where we need to put our attention, not on download metrics. But that's, in my opinion, one of the biggest flawed metrics in our space, because when people see that number, which is staring you right in the freaking face when you log into any podcast platform, and that's messed up too, you should have to dig a little for that number. But when you see that number and you're thinking, oh my God, I thought I was going to get X, but I've only got Y.
So deflating.
You start doing a good job. And that's not the case at all. With podcast download metrics, what you have to understand is that you're building a catalog of content, and those numbers are going to constantly grow, because just because you did season 1, so let's say it was 8 episodes, and then you come out with season 2. Well, when people tune in and find season 2, more than likely they're jumping back and listening to season 1. Absolutely. So now your downloads on each of those episodes are going up. So just because new content comes out does not make any of your past content less valuable. And it's always going to be something that will increase those download numbers. So focusing on the right metrics is what you have to do. And understanding how the future is going to look for your show is a big part of this. So I believe that looking at numbers as a whole is going to do much more service for you in the long run. But we do take a little look at the future, but I don't think that it's necessary to go too far, because we may have to make some adjustments going forward for the next season, and then we go from there.
Agreed. And that's the beauty, I think, of the season, where you're like, maybe you get feedback. Maybe the title is like a little bit too ambiguous. People aren't getting it, or it's not attracting the kind of leads, or the type of guests that you're having aren't strategically aligned with
Yeah.
collaborating. Who knows? There's so many aspects, but at least
Right.
it gives you that buffer, that time to be like, okay, how can I pivot? Should I pivot?
Mm-hmm.
um and then make those changes. That it feels like it's harder to make those changes when you're doing it from week to week. You're like, you don't have the freaking time. But
Well,
it
think
just
about,
feels hard.
excuse me, think about the overall batching of content. If you are putting together a couple months worth of episodes and then you have it all banked and ready to go out later, you may not be able to make a change until all that content's depleted.
Yeah.
So you may get feedback, but he's like, well, geez, I've still got 12 episodes to go through before I can make any type of change here. I'm not saying that can't be done,
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, it's much better to be in a season format where you can take a breath of fresh air and say, okay, I've got some time to recharge.
Yeah.
I can see what my audience thinks of this, and then I can build from there. So you put yourself in a much better position to make changes if you need to.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
So when people launch, what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make, do you think?
Well, I think coming out of the gates without a strategy is mistake number one. Not knowing what comes next, not knowing what you want that content to do, not knowing who that content is directed towards. These are all things that just make it more of having a podcast just because it seems like the sexy thing to
I
do.
know.
If you don't have your strategy locked in and you understand what your why is, who you're looking to connect with, why you want this podcast to be out there, making an impact, changing the world, that will trip you up, and it really does not behoove you to go down that path. If you want to you want to find a quick route to podfade, just start with no plan and just do it blindly. I can tell you a perfect story about this. I had a gentleman that we've shared connections and referrals and potential leads here in the past, and he had a gentleman that he said, he'd be perfect for your program. I said, great, let's talk. And he told him about it. And then he got back to me, or actually, I reached out to him and said, what'd your client say about my program? And he said, well, he decided he was just going to do it on his own. I said, really?
Oh,
Has he ever done this before? He said, no. And then he said the phrase that it's the ultimate nail in the coffin for any podcaster before they even get started. He's just going to figure it out as he goes.
boy.
I told him, I said, I guarantee he's dead at 3 episodes. I was wrong. He was dead at 2. They put 2 episodes out, realized they were completely overwhelmed because I ended up running into him at a meeting a few weeks ago, and I said, hey, how's your buddy's podcast, or how's your client's podcast coming? Well, and he did. Then he gave me the story, and they got overwhelmed. They just couldn't figure it, and 2 episodes in, they threw in the towel.
Yeah,
That's what happens when you try to do this blindly.
I know.
And that's the thing. I look, when I look back 10 years ago when I started podcasting, I didn't necessarily start for the right reasons, and I didn't really strategize what I was doing. Now, I'm different, and at least it's an anomaly in this case, because I fell in love with podcasting because of my past radio experience, and that motivated me to get better and keep going. I don't think everybody else is built like that. But if I had thought more about, because I started the show out of spite trying to shut some troll up on Twitter. Not the best reason to start a podcast, but again, brought me into the medium, and I thank him to this day. But if I would have done a little bit more due diligence, I probably could have found somebody that had been podcasting for a few years that could have first smacked me and said, slow down and do this for a good reason and not out of spite. But I would have learned so much more about what to expect and how to actually make it successful. The show did what it did. It was in those early stages of podcasting where the learning curve was not exactly as high as it is today.
No.
But long term, I don't think I was set up for any type of success. And now I look at anybody coming into this, it's evolved, and there's so many moving pieces to it.
People are blown away how many moving pieces. They're like, holy crap, how many decisions do I have to make? How many tools do I need?
Yeah, and that's the thing. There's never going to be a way to replace or eliminate the work, but there are absolutely ways to simplify it.
Hell to the ass.
And that's where if you outsource somebody, even if you're doing it all DIY, there are still ways that you can build this in a way that makes it much more efficient.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm teaching. And that's the message I'm trying to bring out to podcasters, new and seasoned, because this podfade epidemic needs to change. The
I
fact that
know.
we've got over 5 million podcasts listed on Apple and less than a million of them have produced active content in the last 90 days, that's a major gap that we need to close. We have to find a way to get to a better number. And it starts with putting a better message out there. And what I've been saying to my friends in this space is we got to start singing some different songs. The
Yeah.
playlist is overdone, overplayed, overused. It's time to start building a new one. It might be up to us to be the ones that bring that message forward, but I'm here for it
Yeah.
because I think
Same.
more people need to hear it.
I know. And I think people need to feel like it's more doable, that there is support.
Yes. Yes.
People are like, oh, I need to find a VA. It's like, find someone that's in the podcasting industry where it's like a no-brainer for them to do
Yeah.
it. And you don't have to figure it out together with a VA. You can just bing, bang,
Right.
boom, get it out. And same with having someone that can, like you, to help strategize, get the clarity, and get something out faster and more intentional and strategic. That is so much of a better way of spending your time and your money.
100%. That VA thing is huge. I actually had a conversation with someone about this. It's the logical first step when you're ready to bring on somebody to help you. It's not necessarily focused on a specific thing. Well, I need a VA.
I know.
And where does that come from? A lot of the advice out there says that the
I
first
know.
move should be to bring on a VA. And I don't disagree with that completely, but I think if it's about your podcast, just hiring a VA that has no experience isn't going to serve you any. Like anybody could reach out and, hey, this person wants to be on your podcast, but you have to think about what you really want to accomplish and finding a specialist versus someone that, if I need to have back surgery, I'm going to a back surgeon, not the guy that rubbed my feet or massaged me. You know what I mean? Like you got to find the right person for this. Like they say that you could use a Swiss Army knife or a scalpel.
Yeah.
The scalpel has got one job and it does it really, really well. That's the person you need to find.
Hallelujah. Absolutely. We could have a whole episode just on that topic.
On the scalpel and the Swiss Army knife,
The
I'm here for that
VA.
too. On the VA. No, you're not wrong. Again, I think there's a value to them
Yes.
and they
Yes.
bring a lot to your team. But again, if it's focused on getting your podcast off the ground and keeping it running efficiently, you got to find the right person to
And
help you do that.
optimized. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Hallelujah, man. So how can people find out about your VIP day? How does it work? And obviously other resources that you have to share.
Well, I've got a great offer for the listeners of your podcast,
Woohoo!
Lindsay. Come over to
deal.
bombtrackmedia.com/VIP, and you're going to learn all about what we're going to cover in that VIP day. But then you need to reach out to me directly and let me know that you heard this message on Lindsay's podcast, and I will give you a $250 discount on your
Nice.
VIP day. So join me. We're going to put your plan together in one day. You're going to walk away with the confidence and the clarity to do your podcast right. And I also offer 30 days of additional support after the fact. So
Nice.
it's not just finish the day and we're done
Yeah.
here. I'm still in your corner. I'm still there to answer questions, and we're going to make sure we do this right. But ideally, in that 30-day period, you're going to have your show up and running. That's the goal.
Love
But
it.
I'm in your corner to make
Yeah.
sure you do this right. And if you need a helping hand or a resource, I'm there for you. But
Love it.
bombtrackmedia.com/VIP is where you get started.
And I bet it's so rewarding to finally see the shows like take off and launch. And
Yeah,
much
I've
fun.
helped, and that's like I have never officially done this in a VIP capacity like I'm doing now, but having helped people launch podcasts in the
Oh yeah,
past,
you've done it.
you're damn right. It feels
Yeah.
so good, and especially when you see their confidence grow as they get used to being a podcaster, they get
Yeah.
more acclimated to being on the microphone. They're finding their voice, they're finding their message. That's so fun to watch.
I know.
And that's to me one of the greatest rewards in this is watching a new podcaster bloom, because everybody starts in that questionable
know.
mode of, is this for me? Can I do this? Am I really going to excel? But once you start talking and doing your thing and you discover you've got that voice and you've had it in you all along, that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
so fun to watch.
I love it. Well, I could talk to you all day. I need to have you back
Likewise.
again some other time.
Well, you'll be
Yeah.
on my show. We're going to
Oh
continue
yeah,
this on.
that's right. Woohoo! I forgot.
So if we can plug that now, July 17th,
Yeah.
depending on when this is live, is maybe,
Yeah,
or depending on when you're
exactly.
hearing this, it could be
Ooh.
past or present
I
or
know.
future or whatever.
I get to chat
July
with you again.
17th.
That's all I care about.
Yeah, all I know is Let's Blow This Up Live is the
Yeah.
weekly live stream that I've been doing, and Lindsay's going to join me, and we're going to continue this conversation and really dig into the repurposing aspect of podcasting, because that like I said, and we've talked about today,
Mhm.
incredibly important and helps you check so many boxes. So I'm looking forward to that, Lindsay.
Yeah. Ditto. And I'll see you over on LinkedIn. I know you're super active there. I love all your
Yep.
videos and your reels. Really great tips there. So definitely recommend connecting with you on LinkedIn for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, just if you visit bombtrackmedia.com, you'll have access to
Yeah.
me everywhere. So feel free to connect on the platform you like to play on the most.
All right. Cool. Thanks for
All
joining
right.
me.
Thank you,
And
Lindsay.
we will see you all. Whoops, I almost hit my mic. We'll see you all next week on the Leverage Your Podcast show. Have a good one.
See you, everybody.